Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about how a tiny, nearly indestructible creature crash landing on the moon has basically exposed a massive legal and ethical hole in our rules for space exploration. And trust me, this is way more than just a quirky science story. It's a real warning shot for this whole new private space race. And that's a real quote. That was the bold claim from Nova Spivak, the guy behind what everyone's now calling the Tardigrades Affair. You see, his foundation was trying to create what he called a backup of planet Earth, which sounds great, right? But his actions have raised some seriously big questions about who's actually in charge when private companies start heading for the stars. So here's what went down. You've got this historic Israeli lander, the Beresheet, but hidden inside its payload from the Arch Mission Foundation were thousands of dehydrated tardigrades. You might know them as water bears. And here's the kicker. They were snuck on board. The mission's partners, the folks who actually built the lander, had no idea they were sending life to the moon. Okay, so you're probably thinking, so what, right? They're just some microscopic animals on what's basically a dead rock. What's the big deal? Well, this whole incident threw a major international policy into the spotlight: planetary protection. And believe me, it's about a lot more than just not leaving your trash in space. The core idea here is pretty simple, actually. Think of planetary protection as a two-way street. It's designed to keep our earthly germs off of places like Mars or Europa, so we don't mess up the science, and, just as important, it's designed to make sure no potential alien microbes hitch a ride back home with us. Let's just break that down to make it super clear. Forward contamination is us messing up space. I mean, can you imagine finding life on Mars only to realize, oops, we brought it there ourselves? And backward contamination, well, that's space messing up us. It really gets to the heart of what it means to explore space responsibly. And the stakes here, they are incredibly high. Best case scenario, we just ruin our chances of answering one of the biggest questions ever: are we alone? It also risks creating a tragedy of the commons, where one person messes up a pristine environment for everyone. And worst case, we get a real-life Andromeda strain situation, bringing something deadly back from another world. So to really get why this is such a gray area, we need to look at the rulebook we're all using. And here's the problem. It was written decades ago, back in the Cold War, for a world where only two superpowers were really in the game. You can see right here how the legal side of things has shifted. It all started with the big one, the Outer Space Treaty in 1967. But then things got complicated. The Moon Agreement in '79, it pretty much failed. No major spacefaring nation signed it. Then you fast forward to 2015, and you start seeing national laws that are all about boosting private companies to go mine asteroids. Now, that Outer Space Treaty is still the bedrock of it all. It says space belongs to everyone, nobody owns the moon, all that good stuff. But you've got to pay close attention to that last point from Article V6. It says nations are on the hook for all space activities that come from their country. And that explicitly includes private companies. This is the whole ballgame. But, and this is a huge but, that treaty was just not built for the world we live in today. It wasn't designed for this absolute explosion of private companies racing to the moon and Mars. And that has created a massive regulatory gap. I mean, just look at the numbers. In the next decade alone, more than a third of all space missions are expected to be private. We are talking about dozens and dozens of missions that just don't fit into that old government-led model of space exploration. So why the huge boom? Well, the economic incentives are, forgive the pun, astronomical. You have companies making plans to mine asteroids that could be worth trillions of dollars. With that much money on the table, the temptation to cut corners on expensive rules, like planetary protection, is just enormous. And this is where it all comes crashing together. Article V says the U.S. government is responsible for a company like SpaceX. But here in the U.S., there isn't one single agency that has the clear authority to regulate what a private mission does once it's out in deep space. The FAA can okay the launch, sure, but after that, things get real murky real fast. And that creates this huge gap in oversight. So, how do we fix this? How do we even begin to write a rule book for this new era? Well, experts are actually looking at successful models from right here on Earth to try and figure out a path forward for the final frontier. The key thing to remember is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look at what already works. We could model new rules on how we handle international aviation safety, or use economic incentives like we do for global food standards. We've even got a successful model for managing space debris that everyone agreed to through the UN. We can do this. So if you combine those lessons, you start to see a path forward. Step 1. Make the current voluntary policies into actual binding laws. Step 2. Give an international group the power to actually monitor what's going on. And step 3, and this one's really clever, just use the power of the purse. If NASA is handing out billions in contracts to SpaceX, they can write planetary protection rules directly into those contracts. So in the end, this whole Tardigrades affair wasn't really about some tiny space pirates. It was a wake-up call. It's a small preview of the much, much bigger ethical and legal fights that are just around the corner as we really start to expand into the solar system. And all of this leaves us with the fundamental question we started with. This whole incident forces us to face it. As private companies, driven by profit and vision, start leading the charge into the cosmos, who is actually in charge of the final frontier? Who gets to write the rules for new worlds? That's something we're going to have to decide, and we need to decide it soon.